I love the idea of bringing your worth. Holly touched on it yesterday. Some of y'all touched on it in the conversations. I think it's so important to bring your worth, but first you have to know what your worth is. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Thinking about today, I was thinking a lot about a quote from Brene Brown, one of my favorite authors. She says, you either stand in your story and own it, or you stand outside of your story and you hustle for your worth. That's deep, right? Now, I used to live in Silicon Valley, and so we talk about hustle as far as hustling for attention, hustling for the next dollar, hustling for your startup. But what's deep is that that's not what she's talking about. She's talking about hustling for who you are. But that's our born gift, right? You were born and you've created a story. Your story is in your voice. Your story is in your POV. Your story is in your heart. Your story is even in your trauma. To quote Leonard Cohen, that's the cracks are where the light comes in, right? But you might have a story, but it doesn't mean that you own your story. Those are two separate things. Here's my story. I'm a supporter of solopreneurs, side hustlers, what I call non-traditional entrepreneurs. And I'm the primary caregiver of a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. They're both boys. They're both really active. They both drive my wife and I crazy, so they keep our life rich. And I'm here supporting y'all and able to support them by doing this. But I didn't always own my story. Now, I've been a journalist and full-time freelance writer it's my 21st year, but I was freelance writing before that. So that I always owned. I've been a writer since I was my youngest kid's age. However, about 6, 7, 8 years ago, I didn't own my story. About 8 years ago, I became a dad. Again, my son is about to turn 8. I became a dad. At the exact same time, I became an entrepreneur. My wife went back to work. She has a traditional job. And it was me and my 4-month-old son. And we're just looking at each other like, what the hell do we do now? Because I don't have any stepkids. I don't have any experience. At that same time, I'm doing my first startup called So Quotable, which actually is about capturing people's quotes. Right? This is about 2013, 2014. You can share the quote on Twitter, stuff like that. I ended up bootstrapping it, which meant I paid for it myself, no outside investment, programmed the whole thing, definitely DIY. Shout out to Gabrielle. And did the DIY approach. And as I created that got the attention of TED. That led to my first TED Talk. When I'm on the TED stage, then that led to me connecting with a friend of a friend, a couple connections away. And he and a colleague of his were actually working on a startup called Cuddler, which connected people for hugs. Again, it's 2014, so it's like Tinder, Grindr, any type of hookup culture. We want to do a platonic version of that. And as I'll get into later, I'm really into technology and understanding sexuality and how people connect. So this is like, peanut butter and jelly. And I was like, yes, I'll join. I became a co-founder. We blew up really quickly. It was right after my son's first birthday. We had 250,000 users. We were on the late night talk shows and the morning shows. You can look up CUDDLR on Google and you'll see like the mess of stuff that was happening at the same time. And again, I'm still the primary caregiver of our first son. So a peak moment for me was my son was probably about 18 months old and the Wall Street Journal calls. So it's like the number one, newspaper in America, in my opinion. Remember, I'm a journalist. I have a master's in magazine publishing. I'm a journalism nerd. I've been writing for these publications, not for WSJ, but for other publications, but I've never been covered by them. So it's almost like being a vocal coach and then suddenly you're on the stage at the Apollo, right? It's like, whoa, hold on a second. So it was a very big moment for us and for me as a co-founder of this popular app. Again, my son was about 18 months old. And I can't remember, probably because they're taking up so much of my space in my brain. That's what kids do. I can't remember if it was a gastrointestinal thing he had, or if it was diarrhea, or maybe he was potty training. I can't remember, but there was poop involved. Try to keep it PG for Sunday morning. There was poop involved. And that's when she called. And I'm on the phone with her, ended up being a really cool conversation. Talked for like 20 minutes, really nice reporter. The story ended up turning out fine, ended up becoming on the cover story, and that, rocketed us back up to the #1 app in several countries. And while that's happening, forget the PG, I'm cleaning up shit. That's the short version of it. And I got the phone with her, and I just felt one feeling: shame. I felt shame. You know, I'm pretty sure Elon Musk wasn't cleaning up poop when he was on CNBC. I'm pretty sure the late Steve Jobs, who was around when I was in Silicon Valley, you know, wasn't taking his kids to school and dealing with, you know, projectile vomit or whatever, things that you deal with when you're the primary caretaker, when you're primary caregiver. I'm sure he wasn't dealing with that. I am an imposter. What the hell am I doing? Remember, my background is journalism. So I've been an entrepreneur only for like a year and a half. And suddenly I'm on the cover of the Wall Street Journal. Suddenly we have the #1 app in America and all around the world. This felt incongruent. And most importantly, which I want you to hear, there was no one else who was doing this. There were no beautiful pregnant women on the cover of Inc. magazine, who I'll write for later. But that hadn't happened yet. There weren't guys who were saying, okay, this is how we represent for parenthood, and we can have a stable career that creates and nourishes the world. They weren't around. I felt like I was one of one. Therefore, I had nothing to compare myself to. The popularity of the app got us to the point where we were able to get it acquired. This was right after my son's 2nd birthday. So we owned it for less than a year and then ended up selling it. We made a profit on it. So it ended up being that kind of Cinderella story. I still didn't own my story though. And so people started asking me to speak. People started asking me to write. I started a column with Inc. magazine. You can go to inkdamonbrown.com to check that out. And all these things started to happen. And suddenly people wanted to hear my story. And I was like, well, this time, let me be more direct about it. And slowly I came out of my shell. I'm like, yes, it was a struggle. Yes, I woke up at 3 a.m. to handle this startup. Yes, all these things. And 2 things started to happen. First of all, as I started to share my story, then people started to understand that they were okay. That there was no perfect one type of entrepreneur, one type of creator, one type of way to make an impact. You didn't have to, as I say in one of my books, you didn't have to run away to the circus to make an impact. You could actually be who you are. Most importantly, people saw me and they saw themselves in me. And so the people who were part of the LGBTQ community, people who were people of color, women of color, whatever you were, who didn't look like or act like a Mark Zuckerberg, who didn't look like or act like a Stephen King, no offense to Stephen King, you know, people who didn't pattern match, as we say in Silicon Valley, or didn't have the culture fit, they were able to see me. I was a light for them. Me sharing my story wasn't about me getting comfortable with me, though that was a part of it. It was about me getting comfortable so that other people could see that light. When it shifted to not being about me and looking at my imperfections, to shifting to nourishing the world and showing up for other people so that they could be uplifted, suddenly those insecurities started to melt away. I did a book called The Bite-Sized Entrepreneur, which is based on the popular Inc. column. I did it in my own imprint, as Amanda mentioned, and it became a bestseller because the traditional publishing industry didn't see my vision. At that point, it was my 19th book, actually 18th book, but they didn't see it. And luckily, I was confident enough in my story and I embraced it enough to say, you know what? I don't need traditional publishing. I'll publish it myself. It became a bestseller. Now those conversations are different. But that required me owning my own story. That's what Bringing Your Worth is about. That's why it's the title of one of my books, Bring Your Worth. It's the title of my publishing imprint. Like, this is what it's all about. That's why I'm showing up here for y'all. And it comes down to 3 basic things we're talking about bringing our worth. Number 1, you have to understand that everything is a partnership. Doesn't matter about the monetary value or where you're on the totem pole, quote unquote, everything is a partnership. Number 2, it comes down to understanding that you do not and should not wait for permission. Do not wait for permission. Do your thing. And number 3, it comes down to everything and everyone, including you, has a legacy. This is really important, so I'm gonna take a pause here and throw this into the chat. So let's talk about everything as a partnership. As Amanda mentioned, I have a master's in magazine publishing, 2 degrees in journalism, been a journalist for 21 years. If we rewind it back to the year 2000, I just graduated Northwestern, again, my master's, and I was broke and I was unemployed. In fact, the day that I was graduating, my second job offer got rescinded. You go to the number one journalism school in the country, you still can't get a job. That's how rough it was. The dot-com bubble had just burst. When I went to the program, it's a year-long program. I went into the program in 1999. It was, as we say in Silicon Valley, frothy. It was frothy, right? People were doing like $1 million Super Bowl commercials and Silicon Valley was popping. It lifted all the magazine industry, if y'all were around at that time. Again, I'm a big magazine nerd, so I was nerding out on that. But about 4 months before we all were going to graduate, and I had a small graduation class, dot-com bubble burst, I think that June, it was a wrap. It was a wrap, right? I remember going, to this day, again, it's 21 years ago, to this day, I think I'm turning red right now. I remember going home on the L, the train in Chicago. Last day of class, I'm not going back to Northwestern, not going back to Medill, we call it. I had my degree under my arm, very expensive degree under my arm, going back to my overpriced apartment. At least it was overpriced for someone who did not have a job. I'm like, what the hell am I going to do? And so, of course, I became a freelance writer, and the rest was history. I've been freelancing since then. So I'm thankful for that moment. Around that period of time, for those first few years, it was ramen noodles. It was rough. I know some of y'all can relate to that. Thank God I didn't have a family at the time because I could barely feed myself. But it was a good time to do that. I was in my early 20s. It was a good time to go through that experience, and I still draw on that today. Around that period of time, there was actually an alumni meeting, which to me, in my 23-year-old brain, I'm like, free food. I'm definitely coming through. So I go to Northwestern. First time I've been there, I think, in 3 months since I graduated. And in the buffet line, I'm not exaggerating, I run into an editor for Playboy. Now, Playboy is a big idea now, but back then, 20 years ago, it was the stuff. And Playboy is based in Chicago. Remember, most publishers were based in New York or LA. To have a Chicago-based, born and bred company, they were running things in regards to magazines, right? So I'm like, oh, snap. Okay. All right. Well, should I ask them to pass the carrots or whatever? But luckily I didn't nerd out like that. But I realized there are two ways I could approach it. Both of them will be fair, but two ways I could approach it. The first way is I could say, hey, nice to connect with you. Listen, we probably have the same favorite professors, because I'm guessing you just graduated too over the last few years. Man, I love Playboy and I'm broke. I don't know how I'm going to get home, probably going to walk. And I don't know how I'm going to eat. I definitely don't know how I'm going to pay my rent this month. And wintertime is here too. It's winter in Chicago. Listen, we probably have the same energy. You probably have the same background. I like Playboy a lot. You probably have some pull there. Is there a way I can get an article or something? Just something real quick so I can get this money? Please? Could I do that? So that's one way to approach it, right? You can see where the partnership discussion's coming in. But luckily, that's not what I said. It must have been wisdom from upon high, or I've always had good mentorship. Maybe it was a mentor in the back of my mind that allowed me to show up in that way. And I said, listen, number one, I love Playboy. I love Playboy. My dad loves Playboy. Even my granddad collected Playboy. Back when I visited his place back in Jersey, where I'm from, he had collections of Playboys from the 60s and 70s. I looked through them. I understand the legacy here. And I love Hugh Hefner's work and being very progressive, at the same time being countercultural. That's a tough balance. I know not everybody likes him, but I understand what he's trying to do. However, I understand too that I think he's about to turn 75, if my math is correct. And I know that the peak of Playboy as far as circulation was probably in the 70s. I think it was 72, 73, around the time I was born. And so it feels like that you guys might need a little bit of energy. I'd love to provide that for y'all. You know what I mean? To be able to bring some of that insight. Obviously a young man, I know technology really well. I know sexual culture really well. I'm willing to talk about mores and stuff like that. Those things that people that are my age and a little bit older are interested in. And I love to give some of that energy back into your publication. Listen, I have a couple story ideas I think will work well for you. One in particular, I'm not going to pitch you now. Like, I know you got to eat your snacks and stuff, but early next week, can I go ahead and email you, or if you want to do a quick phone call? Either way is fine with me. Just let me know. Enjoy your time here. I would love to stay in contact and see how I can support y'all. That's how it went. And about 2 months later, I ended up doing my first piece for Playboy. It was for Playboy.com. It was, of course, one of the first video games to feature sexuality, which is kind of one of the things I studied back in the day, and was the premise of one of my earlier books. That led to me doing regular articles for Playboy, the actual magazine, being a regular freelance writer for them. That led to me doing features with Playboy, which at that period of time was a big deal. That was like my version of the Atlantic or the Smithsonian or even the New Yorker. That was my version of that. And then finally it peaked out in 2012 when Hugh Hefner's people actually called me to collaborate on a book called Playboy's Greatest Covers. It's a hardcover book. If I had been thinking, I actually would have brought it with me at this stage. But it's a hardcover book. It's a beautiful looking book. I'm very proud of it. I actually worked with Hugh Hefner himself. I guess it was like 3, 4, maybe 5 years before he passed away. And so we ended up doing great work together. But then if you put it in reverse, if I said, hey, please just give me a job. Please, you have all the power. Please give me a crumb. Then would Hugh Hefner and his people be calling me and my agent? Would I be doing features for Playboy, getting paid well for that? Would I be doing articles for Playboy? Would I get anything beyond the first couple of small articles and low-paying articles I did for Playboy? Would that have happened at all? My guess is no. And so if you feel as though that things are out of whack with, say, an agent or with an editor or with a publisher, or even with your colleagues, think about the roots of that relationship, because they're kind of like a tree. They go down. And then as they go down, they go up. That foundation that I still have with Playboy 20 years later, started at the buffet line when I was a broke writer. And so if you're not feeling that worth and that respect from an agent that you're trying to work with, if you're not feeling that worth and respect from a publisher you're trying to work with, if you're not hearing back from a literary magazine, from the query that you sent them, think about how you're approaching that relationship. That was discussed a little bit yesterday, which made my ears light up. I'm like, yes, this is what we need to talk about. So number one, everything is a partnership. That's how you bring your worth. If you don't show up and apply to these different literary contests, then they can't fund the contest. If you're not sending these manuscripts over to these agents, they're not getting their 15 or 20%. If we don't pitch and write for these magazines, they don't exist. You are a partner in this. Number two, recognize that, recognize that you do not need to wait for permission. You do not need to wait for permission. Now, my favorite pop cultural anecdote comes from about 15 years ago. It's something called the Oprah bump. You can give a shout in the chat if you've heard of that. The Oprah bump is basically, again, about 15 years ago, if Oprah mentioned a product or a service or a food, idea, whatever, it would blow up. So people were pushing really hard to get their stuff discovered by Oprah, right? Yeah, I see some of y'all recognize that. And so that Oprah bump, that was probably when she was the queen of daytime talk shows. For some of y'all that missed that, she kind of was Ellen before Ellen, right? But we all have these different variants of that depending on the generation. Maybe like 50 years ago with my grandmother's generation, it might have been Ed Sullivan. It's probably the Ed Sullivan bump. He's, pitching Clorox or whatever. But what they found with the Oprah bump is that it actually wasn't much of a bump. For every product that blew up, whether it's the Cronut over in Midtown Manhattan, I think it's Dominique Ansel. My French is horrible. Sorry, Dominique. With his work, or it's Elizabeth Gilbert with Eat, Pray, Love, and her 11 million books sold, and of course the TED series and all that stuff after that. Those exceptions prove the rule. Most of the time, there was not an Oprah bump. Oprah mentioned thousands of products over the, 30 years, 25 years that she was running daytime TV before she started her own network. But people were pushing to get the products to her because they felt like that was the solution. And again, the examples, prove the exception. I can mention Eat, Pray, Love because that book blew up and really started Elizabeth Gilbert's career. But there were like hundreds, if not thousands of authors where you never heard from them again. Or if you heard from them, it wasn't because of Oprah. Now, again, you can replace the Oprah bump with the Stephen Colbert, or when he was on TV, the Jon Stewart bump. There's articles about that if you want to Google it. You can replace that with the Kardashian bump. If they mention something, of course, they usually mention their own products. I've done videos about this on my YouTube channel at youtube.com/BrownDamon. It's genius. You create a product and then you talk about the product on your show, and then it makes the product blow up. It's like this, what's it called, Oribus? It's like a snake eating itself, right? So you have that. Even today with the TikTok influencers. And it's like, if I can get this TikTok influencer to dance to my music, then suddenly it'll be #1 on the charts. It's the same discussion. We're hustling for the wrong thing. Instead of hustling for our audience, we're hustling to get their attention. Now, I have a personal confession. Back when I was much younger, not that much younger, back when I was much younger, I'd have this dream where, let me play it out. It'll be like, hey, yeah. Hey, Damon, yes, it's David. David Remnick, yeah. Yeah, from the New Yorker? Yeah, you've heard it, right? You've heard of it, right? Yeah, totally. Listen, we appreciate your work and we would love to have you involved. So we want to give you the whole next issue whenever you're ready. 40,000 words. Yeah, similar to what we did with 9/11. Yes, like that. But we're going to do that for you. And just whatever topic you want to cover, because we trust your work. And yeah, we just want you to bring your light to this publication because we really need that support. We need that energy. So if we could do like I'm sorry, I'm insulting you. If we can do like $4 a word, if that's okay, but we can talk about that. Listen, just think about it. Do it on your own time, but we'd really love to have you in here. And when you get an opportunity, come out to New York. We'll fly you out. We'll take you out for a nice dinner. And yeah, we'll make sure that happens. Right? How many of y'all have had that fantasy? Replace the New Yorker with whatever. Again, with Playboy, with the Atlantic, with Smithsonian, which used to be my other publication with Playboy that I love, but I never got into Smithsonian. We often have this fantasy that we're going to get picked, as Seth Godin would say. We're going to get picked. We're going to be selected. The gatekeepers are going to say, yes, last night you weren't a poet, but today you are a poet. You are crowned. You're crowned the poet. You're crowned the next hot thing, the next hot shit, pardon my French, as we would say back in the day. It's not going to happen. Just like the Oprah bump, you getting into the New Yorker, like I've had pieces I've written for the New Yorker, but they never ran. They're actually available in a recent compilation I did called the Damon Brown Reader. But I know people who have been in the New Yorker and they got paid well, but their lives did not change. But here we are waiting by the phone. We, including me. Here we are waiting by the phone. Sorry, you tell how old I am. Here we are waiting by the phone. Here we are hustling to get our attention of the Oprahs, or whatever the equivalent of Oprah it is. It could be Publishers Weekly. It could be a book list. It could be whatever. Poets and writers. I don't care. Like you replace it with whoever you're hustling for. Even if they give you permission, that doesn't guarantee success, financially or otherwise. And then who are you hustling for? It's like asking Stephen King what kind of #2 pencil he uses, which people ask him all the time. Like, I don't know him, but he's written about that. Or asking Anne Lamott, which direction she faces, towards the sun or away from the sun when she writes. It's bullshit. It's what Stephen Pressfield would call a resistance in his classic book, The War of Art. It's a barrier. It's why some of us go to grad school and some of us go to law school. It's why some of us wait till our kids are growing up a little bit more, or until we get through our divorce, or whatever the case may be, and then we'll get serious about writing. It's another barrier. It represents fear. F-E-A-R. That's what it is. You waiting for Oprah, you waiting for David Remnick, you waiting for poets and writers, I don't care. That represents that resistance that Stephen Pressfield talks about so beautifully. So the thing is that you're just going to get to that work anyway. So let's say Oprah ends up giving you that approval. Or let's say David Remnick ends up putting you on speed dial. You still got to do the work. And most importantly, again, you're hustling for the wrong audience. Are you trying to please Oprah? Or are you trying to please and nourish the community that you're writing for? Who's going to be around in 20 years? Maybe when you're not around anymore. Let's be honest about it. Is Oprah going to be around? Is David Remnick going to care what you're doing? No. It's going to be the audience that you're nourishing. And that audience ideally will be around after you're not around anymore. That's playing the long game. That's not waiting for permission. Again, as I mentioned, I did the Bite-Sized Entrepreneur, which Amanda mentioned. I did the Bite-Sized Entrepreneur. It became a bestseller. Many publishers rejected me when I came out with it. When I pitched it, I mean, they didn't get it. They didn't believe that y'all existed. They didn't believe that they were entrepreneurs and creatives that were outside of, again, the Elon Musk. They're outside of the Steve Jobs. They were outside of the Jeff Bezos. And a lot of us weren't a-holes. Go figure, right? But they didn't believe that, so I created my own imprint and became a bestseller. Whether it became a bestseller or not, I'm getting the product to y'all. Yep, 7 years later, 5 years later, whatever, the book is still going. I'm still talking to y'all about it. I'd still be waiting on the publishing industry for it. If you're trying to do a book tour and they won't fund you, get on, post-pandemic, get on Airbnb, as I did with my first major book. Airbnb wasn't around, but I did my own version of that with Couchsurfing. Get on the road yourself. How much do you need? If it's money, find a different way to fund it or be more lean with it. If it's approval, find people around you that will approve what you're doing, not them. Find that inner circle that's gonna approve that. It makes me think about what Brene Brown talks about, where she has a list of 5 people in her pocket at all times. And then whenever she gets nervous, she pulls out that list and looks at those 5 people. And those are the 5 people she only gives an F about. Think about that the next time you're trying to hustle for your own worthiness, right? So number 1, remember that everything is a partnership. Number 2, think about not waiting for permission. Find permission from something or someone else that you actually cares about what you do. Not somebody out there. They're abstract. They don't care about you. Get approval from your audience. Get approval from the people that you're trying to serve. Lastly, remember that you and everyone has a legacy. Now, I've been a freelancer, like I said, for about 21 years. On my 21st anniversary, I think it'll be this Labor Day. And I found that we fall into 2 different categories. And I would call y'all freelancing too. You know, because if you're creating stuff, you're not sure if you're going to get funding for it, or if you're working with limited funding, you don't have a traditional job in the writing industry, you are a freelancer. Own that, right? Take pride in that. There's nothing wrong with you not being part of the industry. We tend to fall into 2 categories or 2 extremes. The first one I call is the mercenary, where it's like, I'm just trying to get a paycheck, come in, come out, take care of it. I'm a Ronin, I'm a ninja, I am a hired gun for hire. I'm in the classic version of the medieval version of where the term freelance comes from, where I'm a jouster and I have a freelance. And if you pay me well, I'll go and joust somebody, give me my bag. I'm going to go about my business, right? And then there's another camp. I'll call them the introspectives. And it's like, is this a publication I want to write for? How am I serving their audience? Are they serving my audience? Is this something that I want to represent me? I know I have this poetry book, and I know that this publisher wants to publish it for me. Each of these poems, each of these words, I think they represent me now, and I definitely represent my past. But do these words represent my future? As in the future, when I'm not here anymore, do these words stand the test of time? Is it something I'll be proud of when I'm not here anymore? If I have kids or aunties or uncles or whatever, is this something that will support them? When people in the community that I want to serve, and I might be part of that community, I might not be, when they read this shit, is it going to impact them? Will it give them life? So there's 2 camps. As you can imagine, we're always in this camp. We're always in the introspective camp. Being in the mercenary camp, it's kind of like gravity. Try jumping out of a plane and saying you don't believe in gravity. See how that works out. Either way, we're contributing. We're creating a legacy. If you're not sure if you're creating a legacy or if you're not sure if you're bringing your worth, it comes down to 4 basic questions. When did you start? Why did you start? What impact did you want to make? And when did you start believing that you didn't deserve to make that impact? I'm going to say that one more time. When did you start? Why did you start? What impact did you want to make? And when did you start believing that you didn't deserve to make that impact? If we're not putting our art into the world, there's only one person who can stop that from happening. If we're not putting our energy out, there's only one person who can actually block that. That's you. That's me. In my book, Built From Now, I quote Jay-Z, and he says, we are culture. Nothing moves without us. Now, he's talking about Black culture, and he's talking about hip hop, which I'm intimately a part of. I used to be a hip hop writer myself, but I think that applies to things much bigger than that. He's talking about the energy of the world. He's talking about the artist. He's talking about you. We are culture. We move the culture. I recently heard a quote, and they said, poetry is considered fluff until your heart is broken, and then it becomes a lifeline. Poetry is fluff until your heart is broken, and then it becomes a lifeline. My dual question to you is, with your art, what lifeline are you carrying? And most importantly, with you not doing your art to your best, to your most, what lifeline are you withholding from other people? As you bring your worth, you have to recognize first that art is power. And that comes from recognizing everything is a partnership, recognizing that you do not need to wait for permission. No one can give it to you anyway. And lastly, that everyone, including you, especially you, has a legacy. If we recognize that art is power, then it's about time that we all use it. Thank you.
Always happy to come back to ASJ and connect with y'all and help y'all get to the next level. So as Melissa talked about, we're talking about having your most future resilient career. Unfortunately, I have some bad news for you. A lot of us are running the wrong race. We're thinking that if we master the different technologies, that will keep us safe, or worse, we're going to get on all the technologies, use them, and that somehow is going to protect our job. Unfortunately, that's not going to work. The best way that we can move forward is the way that we could have moved forward in the past, and that is making sure that we do the long way, the trusted way, the human way, as far as connecting with the people we want to serve and communicating with them in the way that we want to. This is important in a few different ways, but the main way is that there are individuals, there are entities, there are trillion-dollar companies that actually want to take our voice, take our ideas, mimic what we do, what we've done for decades in my case, and some cases for y'all. They want to take that and then try to duplicate our sauce, as a good friend of mine says. But they will fail at that as long as we're actually true to how we create and connect with other people. Now, I've been in the tech industry for a little while, been a tech advocate, and I've also been a journalist and an author and a public speaker for a few decades too. Been involved with ASJ for, oh my gosh, I'm not going to say how long. And so having one foot in one and one foot in the other helps me realize that there are 3 main tenets that will help us build a future resilient career. Number 1, we have to understand that technology should be doing what we will not or cannot do. Number 2, technology will not take your job unless you're not doing it. And finally, number 3, Technology is a golden opportunity for us, perhaps the biggest opportunity that we'll have in our career lifetimes. Now, they might sound a little bit contradictory and a little bit odd, but trust me, the puzzle pieces will fit together once I'm done talking. So number one, technology should be used for what we cannot or will not do. So about a decade ago, I had a book called The Bite-Sized Entrepreneur. It became a bestseller. Before I did that, though, I went to a lot of major publishing companies, some of them that I already written bestsellers for, and they didn't understand what I was trying to do. What I was trying to do is talk about this new breed, this new energy of entrepreneurs, of creators who are side hustlers, who are solopreneurs, what I call non-traditional entrepreneurs, trying to make an impact in the world when they already had a life. I used to live in Silicon Valley, and a lot of people that were making the big exits, which means you get a lot of money for your company, or a lot of people that were trying to make a difference, they didn't actually have a life. The thing was that I had a very rich life when I became an entrepreneur. I actually became an entrepreneur at the exact same time that I became primary caregiver to my wife and I's first son. He was 4 months old when my wife went back to her traditional job. And by the time I was done with the second startup, it was right after he turned 2. The second startup was called Cuddler, which connected people for hugs. And if you're familiar with my work, you know I talk about technology and intimacy all the time. So it's kind of like a Tinder or a Grindr or all those old school apps, which are considered old school for the new generation, except it was platonic. So it connected literally people for hugs. We had 250,000 users. We were the #1 app in the world twice in 2014. And then 2015, we were on the cover of the Wall Street Journal. And we sold the company shortly after that. The book came out of that struggle, that challenge, and coming up with 21 tenets for other people like yourself to make an impact in the world without sacrificing everything. It was a wonderful run. It was the first book of my independent imprint. Like I said, the regular publishers were not rocking with it at all. And with that work, that started this second act of my career, which I'm in now. Fast forward a few years later, and it's December of 2020. And a lot of us probably remember where we were at that moment. It was almost the first full year of living in this pandemic. Now, my wife and I had 2 kids. I believe they were 7 and 5 at the time, because the eldest one is about 2.5 years older than the youngest. We're virtual schooling. I remember our youngest one was 5 because he was starting kindergarten, but of course he was doing it from the comfort or discomfort of our home. And I felt very alone, as a lot of us did. Not just alone as far as like physically alone, because my wife works in medicine, she's a doctor, so we weren't playing with anything. So we were very much isolated. So it wasn't just the physical part of it. It was also the mental part of it. There was no in-person ASJ conference, which, as I said, I've been involved with for years. There was no TED conference, which I've been a TED speaker 4 times over, as Melissa said. Suddenly there was no TED conference. There was no gathering or marketplace of ideas, as Adam Smith and other people have said. There was no exchange. There was no moving back and forth. Worst of all, by that time, I became a business coach. And a lot of people that I was coaching didn't know how to make income. Some of them were public speakers, obviously weren't on the road anymore. Some of them were freelancers, media budgets, as you understand, dropped. And there were people that even wanted to work with me that couldn't afford to work with me. So I thought, how can I build something that's free to the public, that's accessible, that would give game, as we say nowadays, to the different people, these non-traditional entrepreneurs, that's different than what I did before, because I can't be on the road anymore. So I started the Bring Your Worth show. It's at youtube.com/Brown Damon. It started December 23rd, whatever the equinox was of 2020. And it was a lot of hard work, but it was also an opportunity for me to give back and also to connect with people. The first couple of years, I had a couple hundred subscribers. This year, starting around New Year's, it started to go up. And just recently, it hit about 15,000 subscribers. Now, I share that number because for a lot of y'all, and some of y'all are my mentors in this, once you change platforms, the game kind of changes. For instance, you could be a long-time freelancer, have a big name, and then suddenly you start blogging and you have a whole different audience. You could be a public speaker, a business coach, an author, and then you start a TV show, and then suddenly there's 15,000 people that I talk to them all the time. They've never heard of the Bite-Sized Entrepreneur or any work that came before 2020 when I started the show. My point is that I understood that I was serving, but there was a whole back catalog of things. Remember, I have my own imprint, so it's my intellectual property. That's a whole different keynote right there. So I can do with it what I want to. Around that same time, when the numbers are going up, January of this year, I started looking into AI. Remember, I did 2 startups, including working on the tech for Cuddler. So this is native land for me. And I discovered something called Midjourney AI. And what it is basically a platform where you can type in a description. They call it a prompt, still very tech heavy. So let me know if you need a translation for any of this, but they call it a prompt. And when you type in the prompt, then it goes to the computer and 30 seconds later, it gives you 4 variations of whatever you said. Salvador Dali swims down the Nile River with a crocodile on his head. 30 seconds later, you got 4 variants coming out of there. It is like magic. As many tech people have said before me, the best tech feels like magic when it's new. This stuff feels like magic. I'm playing around with it, doing some late nights, getting the boys to bed, and then messing around with it. I don't know what I'm going to do, but as a lot of us can relate to, sometimes you find things that we're curious about, but we don't know how we're going to apply it. That's such an important lesson, particularly when it comes to technology. That's built my whole career. I'm sure it's built some of yours. So I'm messing around with it one late night, and it hits me. What if I took the best-selling book from 2016, the audio book that I self-produced shortly after that, I want to say early 2017, took the audio book and then used the most evocative visual passages from it and put that into Midjourney AI. And I used that to illustrate this book that's been sitting on the shelf for, was it 6, 7, 8 years? Math isn't my strength, but it's been a while. And so that's what I did. I spent several late nights putting it all together. And suddenly there's this 2-hour program taking this old audiobook that already had its time in the sun, bringing it into now, and then using Midjourney, this technology, to create something new. Not only was it some way to serve my audience, and it's available right there on the BringYourWorth show right now, and getting feedback from the audience, but also having a proof of concept, ideally for other authors, particularly people who are my age or older, to say that we can use this technology to not only refurbish these big ideas that came from us, from humanity, but also to bring it to a whole new audience. And so those 15,000 subscribers, most of them had never heard of the Bite-Sized Entrepreneur, unless I happened to mention it on a TV show. Now, my background is not art. I have several graphic artists in my family, including my dad. The gene didn't come to me. Like a lot of us, it got mutated somehow. And instead of me doing paintings, instead, I'm using my words to describe these beautiful pictures. Technology was doing something that I could not or would not do. Literally incapable of it with my skill set right now. Now, technology is a few things that, the reverse side works too. In other words, there's certain things that we will do or I can do that tech can't or won't do. For instance, technology is not a journalist. As we figured out, if you've been missing that whole thing, again, I'm involved in the tech stuff. CNET and other major publications, major platforms, particularly in my areas, have been caught over the past year using ChatGPT and other language platforms to actually write their articles. Now, the question is how they got caught. They got caught because, number 2, we realized that modern AI and modern technology, they are not reliable narrators, nor are they reliable sources. There's a term, actually, a tech term now, called hallucinations. Now, I live in Las Vegas, so it makes me think of the desert. And it's like being out in the desert, dying of thirst, and you suddenly see an oasis. And of course, you get there and you think about the Warner Brothers Bugs Bunny cartoons that I grew up with. Suddenly you go to drink it and it's a bunch of sand. That's what AI is doing right now. The latest ones of it. This is 2023. I'm not talking about last year or the year before. So suddenly Saddam Hussein started World War III in 1995 because he got a hold of weapons of mass destruction and blew up half of the world. Random stuff. We don't know where it comes from. These are called hallucinations. Instead, technology is more like Wikipedia. It's a place where you can start. It's a place where you can get general ideas, but it's not a place to finish. We are the finishers. We're the ones that do the double checking. We're the ones that know the reality of things. Technology is a tool. It does what we cannot or will not do. So that's number one. Number two, technology will not take your job unless you're not doing your job. Now, many moons ago, I will not say how long, but you can look at my LinkedIn. I was a young grad student at Northwestern getting my master's in magazine publishing. Now, I did quite a bit. I started my journalism career when I was like 14. So you can do the math from that. But I was still pretty young, as most of us were there. So there's a lot of things of the real world I had to figure out. Running a college newspaper is not the same, as you know, as running the Washington Post. And I swear the bane of all our wise professors' existence, at least the thorn in their craw, I think that's how you term it, was us asking, do we really have to get on the L train, which is the elevated train in Chicago, and go all the way down there to interview the subject? Or can we just give them a phone call? Can we phone it in? Now, if you're of my generation or younger, or actually I should say of or older, you know the power of the telephone, right? Whether you're dialing it with the rotary thing or the early age cell phones, which are just coming into vogue when I was in grad school. So you can call up a subject, let's say a subject that owns a bakery. And there was so many little stories in Chicago. Subject that owns a bakery, and you're calling them up in the middle of the busy day. You would know if they're being generous with their time or if they didn't want to share their story. You could hear if they were frustrated, or you can hear if they were smiling. You can hear when people are smiling on the phone. I'm sure some of you are nodding because you can tell. You know when to ask the next question and to make it longer to elaborate, or when to shut up and let the silence be the next question. And they volunteer the next piece of information. There's so much stuff we can get through the phone. But then you compare that to it being in the middle of a Chicago winter. I know some Chicagoans are here, so you know the deal. And you're on the L train, elevated platform. I don't know why they made it elevated, but you're doing 2 or 3 stops. And every time you do a new train, like I remember mine used to be from the brown line to the red line to perhaps the green line if you're going out west, whatever. You're doing all that. Going through the cold, you get off the train and you see a bustling or maybe a sleepy neighborhood. You might see Ukrainians, you might see Puerto Ricans, you might see Polish folks. Are they milling about or are they separated? Are they in a hurry? Do they have suits on? Do they have like the Dickies on? Are they going to a construction site? What are they doing? Are they little kids or are they mostly older folks? Does it seem like a depressed neighborhood or does it seem vibrant and alive? What are you smelling? And then by the time you get to the bakery, then you can see if people are milling about or if the bakery is quiet. And you might even see the sweat on the proprietor's brow and see if they're stressed or if they're proud or if they're excited or if they're worried, or like most creators and entrepreneurs, if they're all 4. And you might even smell something and it smells like a croissant, but it smells different than the Parisian croissants that you smelled before. It smells a little bit more sugary, which might be closer to, say, the Polish history. And that's before you even did the interview. Now, if you're feature writers like myself, I interview a lot of people for a living, whether it's for my show or when you do business coaching, as some of you coaches know, that's also a form of interviewing. You realize the power of those details. Now, I graduated, thankfully, from Northwestern. It was a rough ride. And right after I graduated, then the same discussion happened, but with new players. Then it became, do I have to call these people? Or can I just send a really, really good email? That would save a lot of trouble. Do I have to email these folks? Or can I just hit them up on like social media? There's a new thing called LinkedIn. I can send them a message through that, and I bet you it'll be a lot faster. There's another thing called Facebook, but I'm not sure if they're using that yet. Am I going to go and send them a DM, which is what the cool people called it later? Or am I going to shoot them a text? Because I have their cell phone number. Why do I have to talk to them? The discussion now, of course, is, do I have to text them? Or can I let this new tech platform, which is free to us currently, or at least mostly free, why can't I let it do the work? Technology cannot read a room. Technology cannot understand the pain of an entrepreneur and the pride that's in their face. No matter how much facial recognition software we got, there's something soul to soul that happens when you see the pain or the pride or all of those in someone's eyes. And it can't actually smell whether a croissant or a pastry is from the Champs-Élysées or it's from some part of Poland. It can't do that. Now, what technology can do, though, which is excellent at it, it's always been able to do this well, is give us the illusion that we're doing our job when we're not actually doing our job. Technology is excellent at that. So number one, when it comes to technology, you have to understand you should use it for what you will not and cannot do. Number two, technology will not take your job unless you're not doing your job. And number three, technology is a golden opportunity. It's an opportunity like a Charlie and the Chocolate Factory or the Willy Wonka movie, depending on what generation you're part of. It's the golden ticket that's going to get us to the dance. Now, what it can do is modify the work that we're already doing. When I was first a struggling author, trying to get my first major book published, ended up taking 5 years. It's a whole nother story. Someone once told me that it takes so long and we should have so much pride in our work because whether we're doing fiction or nonfiction, whether we're doing a sci-fi novel or ghostwriting something, our fingerprint, our energy, our soul, our humanity is in every piece of work that we do. I've done 26 books. As Melissa talked about, I have my 27th coming out later on this year. And every single one of them have a piece of me in it. That's something that AI cannot duplicate. We can get better technology to get it out there, but it can't do me. Technology also cannot build communities as we build communities. I have a newsletter that comes out every Wednesday. In fact, it came out this morning, 5:55 a.m. at joindamon.me. It's a free newsletter. I've been doing it, I think I can say decades now. So a long time, at least 15, 20 years. At one period of time, email was a new technology. Remember, 20 years ago, email was new. Let's think about that. Now it's a vehicle for me to build these communities of non-traditional entrepreneurs like yourself, to build my coaching practice, to have my book imprint with the books that are right behind me. I'm able to do that using technology. But ChatGPT or another platform isn't writing the newsletter. I'm not using Midjourney AI or Stable Diffusion to do these different images per se. Instead, it's me cultivating the community and then me using the technology to actually build a community more, to find more of us rather than to replace us. At the end of the day, it's about us putting more humanity into the work that we do. And that's what was going to allow us to win, to create for another day. But that was the case 10 years ago when everyone had to be on every social media platform. You guys remember that? 15, 20 years ago, everyone needed to have a blog. Do you guys remember that? There's nothing wrong with those, but those are all tools. And as many blogs as we had, as many social media platforms we were on, if we focused on that, we end up missing the big picture, which is our humanity. Seth Godin told me about something called wabi-sabi. Now, I'm into food, so it's not wasabi, just be clear, but it's wabi, one word, sabi, the second word. Now, I'm rusty with my Japanese. Please don't ask me to say any, but it roughly means beautifully human or perfectly imperfect. Now, according to Seth Godin, this term comes mostly from the Japanese tea ceremonies. Like I said, I spent a little bit of time in Japan, but I've never been to a tea ceremony. I've never had that honor. But it's this ritual. It sometimes takes hours where people have like the garb on and you pour it a certain way. And it's just this fanfare, this beauty. What they use to deliver the tea, and even that sounds disrespectful, but what they use to deliver the tea is really important. So here in the States, you can go to IKEA. If you're really fancy, you can go to Restoration Hardware, or you can go to Williams-Sonoma if they're still around. All the fancy stuff, get the best china, and it's perfectly even. Even if you end up using the newest technology, it'll keep your tea at the perfect temperature. But compare that to you sitting down for one of these ceremonies, and you go look at your teacup, and it has a crack in it, maybe a little chip. And you learn that that chip happened from the 12th emperor of Japan, who lived in Edo, which was the original name for Tokyo. And it happened when he dropped the cup by accident. That's wabi-sabi. It's not this generic churn out thing. It's those things that make us beautifully human. Those are the mistakes. Those are the wrinkles. Many, many years ago, I actually was up for a full-time position. It was through a headhunter. They really wanted to work with me. And it was a tempting offer. Now, if you're familiar with my work, if you've worked with me as a coach, if you've read any of my books, you know the amount of traditional jobs that I've had, I can probably count on one finger. So this is a tempting thing. Great company, great opportunity, and they're offering way more money. You see me stuttering, more money than I've ever seen in my life, at least at that period of time. So my books are called Bring Your Worth. That's my imprint. My mug says Bring Your Worth. My shirt says Bring Your Worth. So you know I'm not going to take the first offer. I can't do that. I knew what I was bringing to the table. So I had a conversation with my would-be boss, great guy. And I said, hey, thank you for this generous offer. I can see that you guys respect what I'm bringing to the table, how I'm showing up, and the work that I'm doing. So thank you. It's very generous. And also, I just sold my startup. I just finished my second TED Talk. And there's all these different things that I'm doing, all these businesses I want to create, that with this full-time position, I know based on the contract, these are going to have to be put to the side. So if you're comfortable with it, I'd love to do a counteroffer over the next day that might be more reflective of what I'm bringing to the table. And also, frankly, what I'm leaving behind. He paused for a second, really quick guy. So it's just for a second, one Mississippi, and then he got it. He says, thank you, Damon. And I appreciate your honesty. I know that you know your worth. And so do we. That's why we came and sought you out. Happy to take a look at your counteroffer. And I'll go ahead and look at it and I'll share it with the team if it seems appropriate. But before you do that, though, there's just two things to understand about our business culture. Number one thing is that I and we are not used car salesmen. We're not going to haggle back and forth. The price that we gave you, as far as your salary and the bonuses including it, that's at the top because we feel like you're worth the top. This is the top of the range for our company. If this was an MBA contract, you'd be at your cap. You guys are the salary caps. You're pretty much at the top of it. Maybe we can add $1 to it, but that's pretty much it. And so understand that we can have this negotiation later after your first, second year. Maybe based on performance, we can move you into a different category. But based on HR and all these other things, you're pretty much at the top. Again, you can send me a counteroffer. I'm happy to take a look at it and then pass it on to the team. The second part, though, is even more important. As a culture here at this company, we value all our employees and all our staff. That's why we're generous with the salaries, including your potential one. That's why we're generous with the bonus. So we're generous with the times off. We're very generous. But we do have one cultural rule. Whatever we give, whatever we invest in you for that annual salary, you will have to bring in 10x or 10 times that business. In other words, If you're given $100,000, that calendar year, you're expected to bring in $1 million worth of business. If you're bringing in 200,000, 2 million, and you guys can do the math. And he just got quiet. And I got quiet. And I paused for probably like 2-3 seconds. I said, wow, thank you. You know, I'm really into business culture. I love this insight about your organization, and I'm happy to lead the team in that kind of philosophy. And I'm going to go and sleep on it because I'm not someone that makes rash decisions. But based on what the feedback that you've given me, let's look towards next steps with the assumption that I'm going to take the offer. See, the key thing that I learned and still remember to this day is that you can charge whatever the hell you want. I charge a lot for my one-on-one coaching. I charge $30 for Build From Now, my book that came out a couple of years ago, which is a lot for independent book. But I made darn sure that for my target audience, as soon as they open Build From Now, by the time the first chapter is done, they've gotten their 300 plus worth. That is connected to Wabi Sabi. That's connected to why technology should not be used for anything that should only be used for things that you will or cannot do. That's why technology is not going to take your job if you're doing your job. That's why technology is this golden ticket opportunity for us. Because for me, when I do my keynotes, when you have me as a business coach, even in my writing, you'll hear my language, which I often curse, which I'm trying not to do on here. You'll see my hands flail all over the place because I'm originally from South Jersey. Shout out to the Jersey Shore. And how I'll stutter over my languages sometimes and talk too fast when I get too excited. AI and all the different platforms and technologies cannot duplicate that, because a lot of us, those of us that frankly will not make it, we're trying to shave off the rough edges. We're trying to glaze over the cracks. That weird, idiosyncratic, unusual parts that make us us, that got us into this damn business in the first place as independent creators. If we're not careful, we can use technology to rub off those corners. And suddenly we're that IKEA tea set. So when it comes to technology, we have to understand it's about using it to do the things that we're not willing or able to do. It's about us not worrying about it taking our jobs, but using it as a mirror to realize we might not actually be doing our jobs. And finally, it's the biggest opportunity that we have to show up more in our humanity. And any technology that we use should be used to magnify our humanity, not the other way around. Thank you.
Bedroom Kandi community, thank you so much for having me. I am humbled and honored to be here. When I was thinking about doing this talk today, I thought about Ava DuVernay, who's an amazing filmmaker, and she recently got an award. And what she said just stopped me in my tracks and made me think about talking to you today. What she said was, do not give me a chair at the table. Do not give me 3 or even half the chairs at the table. I want a new table made in my likeness and in the likeness of those before me who were forced out of the room. Now, when she says that, the chair, or in more common terms, having a seat at the table, what she's talking about is actually being involved with the decisions, whether it's the creative realm where she's a filmmaker, it's the spiritual realm as far as establishing religions and standards like that. It's the business realm where you're in the boardroom, or in the cultural realm where you're deciding what we're going to listen to or what we're going to eat. All those things have an impact on our society. Now, I thought about y'all when I heard this quote, because she started doing her filmmaking in her 30s as a side hustle. Now, she's just a little bit older, maybe a little bit younger than me. And so for about a decade or so, she's been able to do I don't know, 12, 13 movies. From the movie 13 about the jail system to When They See Us, about the Exonerated Five over in Central Park. Like amazing, amazing stuff. She's made this big impact in the world. And it started as a side hustle when she was in her 30s. It resonates with me personally because that's also my journey. My background is journalism. I used to write a lot for the major newspapers and a lot of the major magazines like Playboy and the New York Post and those guys. But then I started doing side hustles, and that turned me into a best-selling author multiple times. That turned me into a successful public speaker, speaking at TED and other conferences. It also turned me into a bootstrapping entrepreneur. And my second company, Cuddler, got really popular and actually got acquired by another company. But all those came from side hustles. If it wasn't for those side hustles, I would not be having this moment with you right now. Side hustles have the ability to have you transform yourself, your community, and maybe even the world. But before you get that far, though, you have to be able to learn how to harness the power of the side hustle. It's not just like you start something on the side and then it miraculously becomes this successful thing. As they say, there are levels to this. And I've found that it's three major tenets that if you remember them, you'll be able to have success with your business. The first one is to be a proud side hustler. Sounds kind of unusual because I imagine you and many of you that are listening right now are proud. But I mean, to be proud of being a side hustler with that part of your identity. And we'll get into that. Number one, be a proud side hustler. Number two is to remember your priority. Not priorities, priority as in one thing. Just one thing that's important in your life and as a consequence in your business as you build it. And number three, which is my personal favorite, remembering your worth even when other people don't understand your vision. Remembering your worth even when other people don't understand your vision. So that's the 1, 2, 3. So let's get started. Being proud as a side hustler really is an inside job, but you can get insight from that from all around you. I have a friend and colleague named Chris Gillenbaugh. He did a book called Side Hustle, literally the name of the book. It came out around the same time, maybe right before my own book, The Bite-Sized Entrepreneur, which is also about side hustles. We both had bestsellers. We both were cool. And I was supporting him over in Detroit when he was having a launch party there. And, you know, you have the launch party, you have the book signing, you have someone doing a keynote, you know, you have the mingling afterwards. I was mingling afterwards. I ran into a guy that was from Michigan. So he was a local guy. And he said, Damon, when I listened to Chris and then I'm talking to you now, I thought that I was the first side hustler in my family. I thought I was starting from scratch. And then I remember my Uncle Vinny, and he was really good with cars. Like, he could have been an engineer, a mechanic on a higher level. He could have been designing the cars over in Detroit. And then I think about my Aunt Betty, who was a marvelous cook, a baker, in fact, who baked cakes and things like that. They were getting money and doing things all in the neighborhood. They helped support the neighborhood that I grew up in. However, no one actually said, hey, Uncle Vinny owns a business. Or no one said, hey, Uncle Vinny has a side hustle. They just said, hey, you got car issues? I know a guy named Vinny down the street. He'll hook you up. It'll be a fair price. He'll get you going by the end of the day, I promise. Hey, your daughter's getting married, or, you know, you're having like a high school graduation for her. You know, Auntie Betty down the street, she'll hook you up. You know, she'll give you a beautiful cake, no problem. It's this weekend, I'm sure she can handle it. This was part of the community. His family was part of the fabric of the community. If you think about your own community, you're probably surrounded by side hustlers, particularly back in the day, if you think about the past. The thing was, I'm a business coach. I've done 3 TED Talks. I've done a bunch of conversations and at this point, talked to thousands of people who are starting their own business or trying to pivot their business into a side hustle or whatever. And it didn't dawn on me that I wasn't the one of one, as we say nowadays. I thought I was breaking some type of generational curse, you know, where it's like, oh, Damon's going to become an entrepreneur. Damon's going to create, you know, I'm going to go ahead and be the first of my family to not work for other people, that kind of thing. And then after I talked to the guy at at the launch in Detroit, I realized that was rubbish. My pop, who's the one who raised me, he was one of the first, if not the only, African-American mortgage brokers in the Midwest, in the city that we lived in, back in Lansing, Michigan. Right? Now, I was aware of that, but I didn't put it together. Even worse, my uncle, Uncle George, my favorite uncle, he's based in Camden, New Jersey, which is where my mom's side of the family is originally from. He started not only his own tire shop, which was, I believe, the only major African-American owned tire shop, and he started that shortly after I was born. So back in the 70s. But not only that, but he actually started a roving carnival that during the summer seasons, when you go to, have a state fair or when the church has an event or whatever, he brings the carnival rides. He was doing that for decades. But even more embarrassing, further back, my father's father, my grandfather, who died probably about 15 years ago, he actually owned bars all through Camden, and I believe also in Raleigh-Durham, which is where my pop side of the family is originally from. Not only that, but he also owned repair shops for cars and for trucks. The key thing for my grandfather, though, is that they were catering, or he was catering more specifically, to the African-American community. He would be, if he was alive, he'd be like 90 right now or so. So you think about when he's like in his 20s or 30s, he's doing these startups, which is a word that didn't exist back then. He's doing these startups along with perhaps his main job, which turned those into side hustles. His people, our people, couldn't go into those other bars. We couldn't get the repairs done at other places for fear of having, price gouging or other issues. My whole point is that the side hustle thing isn't necessarily new, particularly if, like me, your family are immigrants, or you're part of the BIPOC, as they say nowadays, the Black, Indigenous, or people of color communities. If you're part of the LGBTQ community, which is a whole different discussion, we didn't necessarily have access to those things. But at the same time, even though I grew up in a household where both my parents are from the inner city, so they grew up poor, inner city poor, but they both had college degrees, very intelligent people. We didn't use the term entrepreneur in my house when I was growing up. We used all these other terms, but we didn't use the term entrepreneur. That was a French term. And no one said side hustle. I'm not sure if that term existed when I was growing up, but people around me were doing it all the time. This is why I say you need to take pride and take assessment in all this lineage. It might be DNA, it might be the people that surround you, it might be the people that helped you grow up. There are hustlers all around you. You just might not see them. And more importantly, they might not recognize that they're hustlers. I have people that I care about that are hustlers to the core. And I mean that in the most positive sense as far as being side hustlers. And you ask them they're a side hustler, they're like, nope. So you have to be able to recognize them so you can get their support and get some of their game, even if they don't necessarily understand that they're side hustling. When you take pride in being a side hustler, then you start to see the patterns and the lineage of the side hustlers that you come from. Along that note, you might be feeling, as other people are, that you have to scramble and figure things out. But if you can identify with what I'm talking about, then you're actually ahead of the curve. It's not just a semantic thing. And again, my background is journalism, so I love semantics. But it's not a wordplay thing as far as they're not being side hustlers or entrepreneur not really, becoming popular in the American language until the last 20 years. It's not just the wordage. For our different communities, it was also because it wasn't a choice. Side hustle wasn't a cute thing that you did, right? My grandfather set up bars to help pay for and take care of my grandmother and, my pop and his sister, my aunt, right? My uncle went ahead and did those things to provide for his large family and to be a North Star for me. Let's not even get into that as his nephew. There wasn't that thing where it's like, this is a cute idea, I'm just going to do it. There's a few factors behind that. If you're part of the minority community, from the Jim Crow laws and the manifestations of that now, which again is another keynote, to the lavender laws who have put limitations on the LGBTQ community, we've actually legally been capped as far as how much wealth we can create generationally and just for our family. And so if you're in that situation, then of course you're going to be a number runner, which I have some in my family. Of course you're going to create your own business. Of course you're going to cater to people in the community who have been neglected because the majority doesn't want to take care of them. Now, here's where it gets interesting, and this is where you get involved, is that this was the case until the elephant in the room, the pandemic. Now it's 2020. Now the unemployment rate is higher, I believe, than it was during the Great Depression exactly 100 years ago, almost to the day. Now people who had the option of getting the gold watch after working at a good job for 60 years, now they don't have that option. Now side hustles aren't cute. Now side hustles are a necessity. People are just trying to get by. The thing is, the people who are underserved, the people who are overlooked, the people in some cases who have been legally repressed, they are actually ahead of the curve now. If you identify with that, you are actually ahead of the curve. So don't worry about running around trying to figure things out and panicking. No. If you understand your history, hustle might be in your DNA. If you already started this side hustle, particularly before the pandemic happened, you're ahead of the curve of all the other folks who are trying to figure it out. You know that it's not a cute thing. You know this is part of your wealth building. You know this is part of your perhaps passive income. You know this is part of your creation, you uplifting yourself, your community. You know all that. So honor that. Again, take pride in that. The last level of taking pride in it is understand that you have the ultimate job security when you create a side hustle. There's quite a few reasons for that. Number one, you're not waiting for someone to empower you. You're not going to work every day, which is cool if you go to work every day, but you're not going to work every day and then waiting for someone to crown you. This is a magic wand to crown you and be like, hey, you're blessed now. Here's a raise. You're blessed now. You're VP of sales now. You're blessed now. You can take that vacation. As soon as you start to do your side hustles, then they become a way to empower yourself. No one told you to start a side hustle. That's probably my favorite part about it, to be honest, on a personal level. No one tells you to start a side hustle. You know, your mom or whomever is not going to be like, you need to start a side hustle. That's never going to happen. It has to come from within. Now, your motivation for it, that could be all over the place. It depends on what you want. But your reason for actually starting it and feeling like you have to start it, no one's going to make you start a side hustle. So it's like the ultimate empowerment. Kind of back to what Ava was talking about. You're not waiting, as I say in Bring Your Worth, my latest book, you're not waiting for anybody else's permission. That's a beautiful thing. And that's a powerful thing, particularly with the direction we're going right now. Another level, as far as with taking pride in it, is that you are able to create your own tribe, which is something you cannot do in most cases with your day job. For instance, there's people that I know and respect and love that work at McDonald's. They could be the absolute best cashier in the world, which would be amazing. But when they're getting to those levels, who are they building the brand for? Are they building their own tribe? No, they're building a tribe for Ray Kroc and for the McDonald's brothers, the people who founded McDonald's and expanded it. Rest in peace to them. But that's who they're bigging up. That's who they're giving strength to. When you do a side hustle, even if it's with affiliation with another company, it's still your name on the door. It's still your creation. It's still your thing, which is fantastic. The last reason why you should absolutely take pride in being a side hustler is you have the ability to create and then have it create for you later. You have the ability to create and have it create for you later. In other words, as you build your networks, as you build your communities, as you build your reputation and all those other details, then it starts to pay you back. And we'll get into that more with the third thing I was talking about as far as understanding and bringing your worth. So number one, so important, take pride in being a side hustler. Not something to be ashamed of, not you go to work and you sneak out and you're sulking because you have to do other things. No, it's quite the opposite. You actually have more job security than other people because you don't have your eggs in one basket. Furthermore, you're empowering your community because you're showing that there's different ways, different types of ways to hustle, different types of ways to create. You do not need to wait for the approval of someone to go and move forward with that. So that's number one. Number two is to make sure that you understand your one priority, that one thing that you are building your life around. Stephen Covey is a really popular author and a consultant. He passed away a handful of years ago, but while he was here on earth, he was an amazing guy. His books, from First Things First to other ones that it's too countless to mention, have made an amazing impact. And my biggest impact with him was one analogy that he used to talk about priorities. He talks about being on the beach, and I'm from Atlantic City originally, so I can visualize it. And you have a jar. You have a jar and it's filled with pebbles, so tiny rocks, and it's filled with gigantic rocks, like not boulders, but really big stuff. You empty it all out. You want to fill it back up, so you put all the small rocks in there, little tiny pebbles. Cool, they're in there. And then you go and put the big rocks in, and they're not budging. The little rocks, the pebbles, won't let it in. They take up all the space. They're all tight. They're not moving. You can push, and they just seem to push back. Pure physics, right? But if you empty out again, you put your big rocks in there, and then you pour your small pebbles in there, they will just fill out perfectly. They'll take up all the extra space. They'll find the nooks and crannies in between the big rocks, and you're back to square one, and everything fits. Of course, like I said, it's not really about the rocks, but the rocks symbolizing your priorities. If you're able to focus on your big thing that matters to you most, and you make sure that's taken care of, then all little stuff seems to work itself out. But if you focus on the little stuff, it's really easy to get distracted, and suddenly your big rocks don't fit anymore. That big rock could be your health, it could be your family, it could be your life. That's why side hustles are so powerful, because it allows you to build up those things over time versus having a big idea, a side hustle be a big rock, and suddenly you're not able to maneuver around of the things that you actually need to function or to thrive or that are important in your life. I discovered this several years ago. I became an entrepreneur at the exact same time that my wife went back to work after maternity leave, and I became the primary caretaker of our 4-month-old son. Now, this had been on the books for a little while. I've been wanting to be a father forever. I love being a father, and luckily it's as great as I thought it would be, even better. But as you know, if you're a parent or if you're a guardian, there's zero preparation you can do to actually have a screaming baby, and you have no idea what's going on with it. I don't care what you read. It's like support you have, it doesn't matter. It's kind of crazy. It was also crazy to come up with this idea and become an entrepreneur at the exact same time. And I came up with an idea called So Quotable, which allowed you to capture people's quotes. If we're having a conversation, I can capture your quote and share it with other people. Really simple idea. Obviously, I have a journalism background, so that was part of the energy with that, I'm sure. My point is that they hit at the same time. And as the adage says, if you want something done, give it to a busy person. And so they got done. The thing is that I knew then, and I knew before then, that being there for my family and being the primary caretaker was my big rock. As far as I could tell, as long as they needed me, I guess I'd put it like that. And so everything would have to work around that. Would have to work around him. And so every day he'd wake up at 6 a.m. on the dot. Not 5:59, not 6:01. I am not exaggerating. 6 o'clock. A little electric light comes on at 6 a.m. He's up screaming, asking for mommy and daddy. My wife would go to work about an hour later. She would get home around 6 p.m. and that's when she would get settled. So do the math, around 11, 12 hours is just me and little man. That's it. And our family was fairly far away, so it's not like I had extra support like that. So it was just me and him, which worked out well, except I needed to make sure that I took care of my business and still handled my stuff. And so I had to go out and find a way to build this startup and continue to write, because I was still a writer, within this time frame. So I started waking up at 5 a.m. 5 a.m., cool. I am not a morning person, but it's okay. I shifted 5 a.m. And especially if you're not a morning person, you're groggy when you first start. And you're like, okay. So I wasn't really getting much done because by the time I got started, he'd be waking up. So I'm like, all right, cool. I'll push it to 4. Now, there's a term in psychology called flow. And if you're getting into work and you're just waking up, it takes you like a half an hour, 45 minutes to kind of see my shoulders kind of muscle in, get some flow going. And by the time that started, I'd have maybe an hour of really good work. So you guessed it, move it back even further, 3:15 a.m. This is the deal. So give me 45 minutes to get out of my grog, maybe take a shower if I was lucky, and then get into the flow, and that'll give me 2 hours of solid work. I did that every day for about 5 months from that fall of 2013 going into the spring of 2014. I actually ended up creating my app, launching it. It got a cult following. It got the attention of TED. TED asked me to do a TED Talk. I did a TED Talk the week after the app came out. The TED Talk and the app got the attention of a friend of a friend. My friend of a friend, as well as his friend, were working on an app called Cuddler, which connected people for hugs. This is 2014, so this is the era of Grindr and the era of Tinder and all those where you swipe right or swipe left. We want to do a platonic version of that. Now, I was a regular writer for Playboy. I did books about the history of sexuality. So this was right up my alley as far as research I was doing and the impact I wanted to make. And so I ended up coming on board as a co-founder. We launched it shortly after my son's first birthday. It became the #1 app in several countries. We had 250,000 users at our peak. We were on the cover of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. It was insane. As I mentioned, this was still happening while I was changing diapers. I think I did the interview with the Wall Street Journal while I was changing my son's diaper. Because at that time he was about 1.5. Yeah, it was real. But shortly after his second birthday, we started getting these phone calls and we were being asked to be acquired. And after some negotiation with a few different companies, we did sell our company. About 11 months after we started that, So we ended up selling it that summer of 2015. Again, shortly after my son's second birthday. We bootstrapped the whole thing. That means we had no outside investment. And so we split up the bounty. The day that I and we were going to get paid, I remember my wife had the day off, or it was a Saturday or something. So she was around and she was in the kitchen, I think, making something for our son. I was at the kitchen table, which a lot of side hustlers understand. You might have an office somewhere, even off campus away from your house, but the kitchen table is really where the work gets done. I'm at the kitchen table and I know the money's supposed to come through and I just want to because I'm not getting a physical check, it's just a digital transfer. So I'm refreshing it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. And then I refresh it and it's there, it hits. And I'm like, honey, it's done. And she said, congratulations. I said, thank you. So what do you think we should do for dinner? And that was it. My 2-year journey with these 2 apps was done. Not only these 2 apps, but 2 TED Talks. I think I wrote a book during that period of time. It was like a really productive period of time. But the thing is, and why I'm sharing this story, is that I was there for my son every single day. In fact, at that point, we found out we were having another son coming as well. And so much stuff going on. The thing is that what would have happened if I didn't have my rocks in order? What would happen if before I started the journey, I didn't say, my son, my kids, my family is going to be the priority, what would have happened? A lot can go to your head. A lot can go to your head. And success comes usually when you're not expecting it. And so you got to be ready for that. You keep saying you want it. You have to make sure that you're ready for that. In my book, The Ultimate Bite-Sized Entrepreneur, which talks about side hustles and talks about my journey and the systems and the challenges that come with side hustles, I have a chapter in there called You Always Have to Come Home. What I mean by that is you eventually have to come back to the life that you're leading, no matter how much business or cultural success you have. I mean, I pretty much had the pinnacle, right? I launched an app, bootstrapped it, did a TED Talk, 2 TED Talks around it, put it together. We sold it. We were on the cover of the Wall Street Journal. Like, what else could I ask from that experience? And at the same time, from when I started my journey to when that part of the journey ended, my son had went from age 4 months old to just over 2. Imagine if I wasn't present for that. Imagine if I didn't have those priorities together. That's why I say you always have to come home no matter what success you have. That's why you got to have your priorities together. If you're praying or you're meditating or you're focused on success, you better be ready for that success as far as knowing what you want to actually focus on. What is your priority? Side hustles come into play with this because that's why I recommend, with all the people that I've coached, I always recommend, don't bet it all on black. Don't run away to the proverbial circus. Do not quit your day job until your side hustle is stable, and I mean really stable, and you got some money tucked away. Don't do that. Don't do that. There are very few exceptions to where I would say, do that. This is not the direction that you want to go in, because if you end up shifting the power dynamic with that, then suddenly your priorities can get way out of whack. And if Cuddler, So Quotable, which was my first app, or getting money from public speaking or whatever, end up being just the thing, and that became a priority, they want to miss this opportunity to actually grow and enjoy the time with my son. If you have your rocks together, then you have this opportunity to build more. The thing is that if you have your priorities together, then you have to do something else, which I think is the most important thing. You have to stretch your timeline. Stretch your timeline. I've gotten to the point now where I've talked to thousands of people. I've coached hundreds of people. I've done discussions and interviews all around the world at this point. The biggest challenge isn't that people like yourself, people like me, don't have enough resources and we can't achieve what we want. Our problem is that we can't achieve what we want in the timeline that we want. Again, let me repeat that. The issue usually isn't we don't have the resources we need to get what we want. We usually don't have the resources to get where we want in the timeline that we want. So if you end up stretching the timeline, there's being a lot of different benefits to it. The first thing is that you're able to avoid burnout. So you're able to create at a pace that fits your lifestyle versus pushing yourself way too hard. When I lived in Silicon Valley about 10 years ago, I spent some time there. I did a lot of reporting there. That was before I became an entrepreneur. And there were a lot of young guys, usually guys, and young, I'd say 22, 23, who would come up with a new app idea, just like I did, come up with a new app idea, and then down some vodka and Red Bulls, or drinking the Red Mountain Dew, which I forget the name of the brand on that, and just guzzle those and try to get the app done within 72 hours. I am not exaggerating. Look at my face. I'm not kidding at all. Like, I remember their faces. I remember these people. And almost inevitably, they'd end up burning out. I knew some people that never came back. They were so burnt out because they were going too hard. They weren't looking at it as a side hustle. They were looking at it as, I'm going to create this app. It's going to get really big, and I'm going to sell it for millions of dollars to Google or Facebook or whomever was hot at the time. Instead, if you look at it as a side hustle, then you can build your timeline out. I know with Cuddler, like I said, or with So Quotable, my first app, my first business, it took me 5 months to get out there from beginning to when it was available in the App Store. I know my colleagues and my friends who didn't have a family, but who are similarly skilled, probably could have done it in 5 weeks. My really skilled friends and the people that I knew who were technically proficient and had launched apps before, probably could have did it in 5 days. But I had to accept that truth that I had this big rock and I wouldn't have it any other way. And so I'm like, okay, if this is my big rock, these are gonna have to be little pebbles. The funny thing is, with the acquisition, with the fame that came with it, with the best-selling books and so forth, I was able to reach those levels doing it my way, focused on my priority versus me getting distracted from these other things, which ended up burning out a lot of people that I knew at the time. So if you end up stretching your timeline and you're feeling this pressure, I have to do this by age 40, you might want to double or triple that timeline and just try to relax into it. The side hustle is going to build exactly how it's going to build. On that note, if you end up stretching the timeline, you also give yourself a chance to really think about your resources and how you're using them. I'm in the same circle through TED mostly, but through other things, in the same circle as millionaires and billionaires and people who have made their money. The challenging thing with having a lot of money is that you can sometimes think it's the answer. You know, as the analogy says, if you have a hammer, then you think everything is a nail. In other words, whatever's in your toolbox, that's going to color how you end up approaching things. And so if you have a ton of money and your idea or your side hustle or whatever isn't working out, then it's tempting to just throw money at it. When it could be an issue with, as they say in the startup world, your product market fit. In other words, you're not giving what your customer actually needs, right? But if you keep throwing money at it, you think it's going to get fixed, but there's really a systemic problem, as they say, that's an issue with it. Same thing with time. Again, the young guys that I saw back in the day in Silicon Valley, they had plenty of time and they had plenty of energy because they were young. So they went in and did it and then ended up burning themselves out and not actually pausing to think and say, wait, is this maximizing my resources? Is this the best approach to take? When you stretch your timeline, you also give an opportunity for your idea and your side hustle to actually grow, which is crucial. I know that when we were working on Cuddler, my main thing, I was essentially the COO and the CMO, so the Chief Marketing Officer. We didn't have titles, but that kind of fit the description. And so I was in charge of the launch. We could have launched 4 to 6 weeks ahead of that. We launched in the beginning of the fall. We could have launched in the summer. But there were certain details that I wanted to get more info on. So we spent a little bit more time working with the beta testers, who are the people who test the product, working with them, getting feedback from them. We kept going over the details. We kept reading the literature as far as how Tinder and Grindr and other competitors were successful, and kept getting those details together. Those certain details that end up making us a success happen at the 11th hour. And, you know, like within those few weeks that we added to it when we could have launched and we waited, ended up being a whole different level of success that we found. And those details kept, made the difference between being a pretty good app, which would have gotten some buzz, to a phenomenal app that ended up being the most popular of that year, and the acquisition, of course. But that came from stretching the timeline and actually giving us that energy and that momentum, not only us, but for the idea itself, and giving it time to gestate, which I think is crucial to that. Lastly, as far as having your priority together, if you can't go fast, then you have to go consistently. And consistency is key. If you don't remember anything else from this keynote, remember that you can't go fast. Consistency is really the key thing. Consistency is the thing. As I said in a recent column that I wrote for Inc., you going fast and trying to rush it and build a community and go like this and that, that's the equivalent of, turning an oven to 700 and expecting the cookies to bake twice as fast. It just doesn't work like that. Consistency is the main thing that you end up getting from it, and that's what makes it beautiful. I call it my idea of compound interest of effort. If you're familiar with compound interest, if you end up having $1 and you put it into the bank, you put it into the credit union, and within that period of time, they give you 5% interest, then over that period, and you leave your money alone, then you have $1.05, right? If you keep that money there and don't touch it and wait till the next period, then you'll get 5% interest, not on your dollar, but on your $1.05, which of course turns it into $1.11 or something like that. If you follow the mathematical curve over these periods, at a certain point, your money will double just by you not touching it. And at a certain point, you actually will be making money on your interest from the interest that they gave you from leaving your money alone. That's compound interest, right? I love that idea, but I love it being applied to other types of resources that we have, the ability to create something and have it multiply just over time. I discovered that back when I first started freelancing, which freelancing means you're an independent journalist. And I've been doing that for several years, decades at this point. I just finished grad school. I was broke in Chicago, probably because of grad school. And I was doing okay as far as writing for the major publications, again, like Playboy. And when you usually do an article, they'll pay you per word. So you do a 1,000-word article, you send it to them, they publish it, and they pay you, say, $1,000, which is $1 a word. If you do the math really quick, right? Standard, good stuff. You do a bunch of those, you can make an all right living. What I discovered, though, early in my career was books. Not as in I wanted to write something big, which I did, but more the hustle, the amazing thing that works out with books. I don't have any authors in my family. Now I do, but at the time I didn't. And so I didn't understand book royalties and how it worked, which are similar to, you can apply it to music, which is what Kandi could talk about. You can apply it to music. You can apply it to patents as far as people doing products and so forth. You can apply it to a whole bunch of different things. But let's talk about books. When it comes to books, I can go ahead and write an 1,000-word article, sell it to Playboy. They cut me a check for $1,000. Yes, rent is paid. Thank you. But then they can go and print that article in another magazine of theirs and get paid again. I don't. They can take my article and put into an anthology, which is essentially a collection of articles in book form. They're doing their thing. They're getting money on that. I don't get another dime, right? But with book royalties, I was like, wait a second. Instead of an 1,000-word piece, why don't I write like 15, 20,000 words on the same subject that I want to get deep on? I publish the book, and then every time someone buys it and reads it, I get a check. Like forever? Like forever ever? Like infinity? Really? Like I didn't have the tools. No one told me. I was so bad. I was like, I've been writing, at that point I've been a journalist for years. I was like, I would have been writing books. Are you kidding? And I didn't even meet my spouse yet. And I didn't have any kids yet. But I still have this vision where I'm like, all right, so I'm married, have kids, and I don't have, and something happens to me or I pass away, whatever, then my partner and my kids are taken care of. And then their kids are taken care of, and they're still getting a check as long as people are buying my books. That is crazy. It's like my favorite Beyonce line, at this point, my grandkids' kids are rich. That line, she wasn't around back then, but that line, I heard that line on Everything Is Love, the latest album, and it just blew my mind. That's the same argument. That's the same discussion. So we're talking generational wealth for me writing 20,000 words, not something that happens once. My point is that, and books started as a side hustle for me. So my point is that you're able to create things that multiply. You're able to create something once and then get paid twice or more. I have 24 books out right now. About 18 of them I'm getting royalties on, or I have a royalty situation. And for a handful of them, I'm getting checks every month. I don't have to write the books again. I can be playing with my kids and getting a check right now. That's something that came from a side hustle. So you're able to create, but that's the compound interest of putting effort into what you got. I'm not just talking about money. I want to make that extremely clear. It's not just the money aspect, but it's also the aspect as far as time. It's aspect as far as service. It's aspect as far as taking care of your community. If you started your side hustle with Bedroom Kandi 5 years ago, because I think it started about 7 years ago, right? If you started 5 years ago with Bedroom Kandi and you're building your business, then people are going to get to know you over time. And suddenly people are going to start purchasing things from you. They're going to think about their needs and it'll go straight to you. That's the compound interest. You can't rush that. So when you stretch the timeline, when you keep your eye on your priority and you make sure everything else is built around that, then you're building for the marathon, not for the sprint. How beautiful is that? It gives me chills. That's why I love sharing this kind of stuff and getting everyone on that level, because that's really where we need to be. So number one, we want to make sure that you are a proud side hustler. Take pride in it. Recognize the side hustlers among us and among your own people. It's so crucial and important. Number two is to make sure that you have, remember, your one priority, your one thing that's so important to you that you're absolutely going to do it and you need to protect it at all costs. Everything else will work out. And in fact, that one priority becomes the grounding. I am confident that I would not have the success that I had with my side hustles and with my career, particularly over the past 10 years, if I did not have my family as my priority. Otherwise, I'd be all over the place. And I've been there before. Third, as I said, my most favorite, let's just say favorite, my favorite one is to remember that remember your worth, even when other people do not see your vision. We have a term back in Silicon Valley called pattern matching. And it's intense, but it's really important to this discussion. Let's say you're walking into a startup and you say, hey, I'm a coder, I'm a programmer, and I would love to work with y'all. What credibility they give to you might change if you're a straight, white, nerdy male in a hoodie and torn jeans who just dropped out of an Ivy League school. They might be like, hey, you kind of look like Mark Zuckerberg. Let's give you some cred. Okay, we'll hire you. Let's see what you got. So there's a level of credibility with that so-called pattern matching that, say, if I walked in there, I wouldn't necessarily have. And in the most extreme version, it wouldn't just be I wouldn't have the credibility. I would actually lose credibility based on my features or whatever aspects don't fit the pattern of other people within Silicon Valley, right? It's a challenging thing. Now we're starting to see the issues coming up. And I know Silicon Valley, but it applies to other organizations, other fields as well. It applies to the arts. Again, it applies to even religion. It applies to anything that's been dominant by certain parties based on this pattern matching idea. Now we're starting to see challenges because now diversity and inclusion is a discussion. And this is well before the recent social uprising with George Floyd or even with the pandemic. Over the last year or two, we're starting to see these discussions about diversity and inclusion. Why is that? Part of the reason is that Silicon Valley, Silicon Alley over in Manhattan, Silicon Beach, Venice Beach over in LA, a lot of these places, they're not popping like they were when I lived there 10, 15 years ago. That's because the same people are in the room. When's the last time you heard of a hot app that came from here? The recent hot app is TikTok, and that's straight from China. Why isn't it popping? Because they have the same people in the room. It goes back to what Ava was talking about. So if everyone in the room looks like Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, and rest in peace, Steve Jobs, who all have similar personalities, if they all look like that, then the ideas are all going to be from their point of view. They're not going to be from the point of view of the LGBTQ community. They're not going to be point of view of the people of color communities. And therefore, they're not going to be catering to those needs. And if you read the statistics from now 2020 up to 2025, there's going to be a browning and a blackening of America, not to mention the LGBTQ community. So there's a level of diversity And therefore, there needs to be a level of inclusion. Why am I sharing this with you? It's because we've been asking for permission. We've been trying to get in the room. That's what Ava's saying. We've been trying to get in the room for decades, centuries. I have friends that are in their 70s and 80s. I talk with them all the time. We've been doing the same thing for decades, trying to get in the door, trying to find the building on the map that'll get us to the room where it happened, as they say in Hamilton. We're just trying to get to the room where it happened, and we haven't been able to do that very successfully. Now, because of the pattern matching that's been happening with that, now they need us to say where the culture is going. I can understand the cultural needs of approaching middle-aged African-American male from a certain community. You know, my wife, my partner can understand it from a POC viewpoint as a female. You know, there's so much diversity and so much discussion that has been part of the game. With your side hustle, you have the opportunity to do that, and you do not need to wait for permission. Literally, like the last third of my last book, Bring Your Worth, Level Up Your Creative Power, Value, and Service to the World, is all about not asking for permission. That's like the whole thing. The whole thing. Like, this is so key and important. This goes back to the pride. This goes back to the priority. So if you know that your stuff is good, and you know you can create on that level as a side hustler, even if it's just, again, I did a successful startup 3 hours a day. That was it for 5 months. That's all I did. So if you have the opportunity to do that and even just get your foot in the door as far as the direction you want to go, then do it. Because the people who are in those rooms who you're waiting for permission for, they don't know what they're doing, number one, because they're all thinking the same. And number two, you have the power to empower yourself. Even if it's a little side hustler, side hustles can become, hey, little acorns turn into mighty oaks. There's a reason why that saying exists. And so with the pattern matching that's happening, they need your, as my friends say, they need your sauce. They need your energy. And so your opportunity, not only as far as the tools that are available, but the openness to you making a mark as a side hustler is greater than ever. That's literally why I'm here. You know, I'm not going to waste my time if it's not part of the cultural mood, or if I'm talking to a community that's not going to get it. I know you get it. That's why I want to emphasize that. Along the lines of trusting your vision, even when other people don't see it, is you got to, in this, along with consistency, this might be the most major key here. You have to let people give you money. It sounds crazy, but I'm going to repeat it. Let people give you money. When you don't give people opportunities to pay you, that's not you being benevolent. That's not you being humble. That's you reflecting your worth of your own self. That has nothing to do with them. There's a few levels to this. The first one is that you have to make sure that you are accessible. Make sure that you are available. A really quick story. My first major book came out. It was called Porn and Pong, How Grand Theft Auto, Tomb Raider, and Other Sexy Games Changed Our Culture. It was about video game history as well as history of pornography and sexuality in America during the course of my lifetime. And I loved doing the book. I spent 5 years on it. I was still really young. And so it was a lot of time to spend 5 years on it. It came out. I put myself on book tour, bootstrapped the whole thing. You'll see a pattern with me. Bootstrapped the whole thing, did a lot of couch surfing at the different places that I lived and crashing with friends. Had a wonderful time. While I was on the road, I ended up finding out that I had an email. It was from a major news station, and they really want to interview me about Porn and Pong. This is a small indie book about a very niche topic, so I went nuts. Great. Few problems with it. The first problem is that I found it in my spam folder, right? You know, spam in your email. So it's like, all right. The second problem is that the news person or news organization contacted me through my blog, which I didn't update as much as I should have, and I barely checked. So it was on my blog. It's like, okay. The third thing, which was really a problem, is that the email or the message came a month before. I didn't see it. So I screamed. I think I literally screamed at my laptop. And then I emailed them right away. I can still remember the woman's name. Like, it was that scarring. And I never heard back. Didn't hear back from the organization. Didn't hear back from the reporter. Nope. This golden opportunity was missed. Now, I'm not saying that you have to be on the proverbial TikTok or proverbial Facebook and be active on there every day. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that, number one, find out where your people are. Most of my people, as far as people in the business coaching space, people that, like yourself, who want to level up their side hustle or start one, people who are about personal empowerment and trying to be more productive and create more while having their priorities in order, they're going to be on Twitter and they're going to be on LinkedIn. So you follow me on Twitter at Brown Damon, or you follow me on LinkedIn and you connect or follow me, and you'll see I'm very active on there. But you won't see me on the other platforms as much. I have a presence on those platforms, but you won't see me active on there. So that's what I'm saying. It doesn't have to be that you're active on all these different things. It's just making sure you're available. There's so many wonderful entrepreneurs that I meet that do not have a website. Like, even today, I don't care about social media. You still need to have some type of presence online for people to reach you and know what you're about. If you go to damonbrown.net, you can watch my other keynotes. You can buy all my books or just check them out and read them if you end up doing the free stuff through Kindle. You can listen to my latest interviews. You go there and you can get to know me. We don't always give that access to people, but we expect to blow up. We want to have these big sales. We want to become the proverbial millionaires, but then we don't allow our customers to reach us, and we're stubborn as far as how they reach us. You can't have it both ways. So you have to have the system in place. As Jim Rohn, who helped teach Tony Robbins back in the day, I'm a big fan of his. His name is Jim Rohn. It's Jimrohn. Jim Rohn said that if you can't handle $5, then how are you going to handle 5 million? In other words, you need to have your systems in place. This is the time to do it. It's always the time to do it. There's never a bad time to get your system tighter. So letting people give you money, the number one thing is to actually make yourself accessible. The second thing is to push the ratio so that it's at least 90% of your time is spent serving and 10% or less is spent selling. 90%, maybe more, spent serving the people you want to serve, your community, your tribe, whatever you want to call it, and then 10% selling. Now, when I say serving, I really mean listening. You shouldn't be talking that much. You should be listening, because then they'll tell you where you're supposed to go. And then if you go where they say they need you to be, then you don't need to sell anything. They'll just be like, okay, that sounds great. How much is it? Great. Okay, where can I buy it? Again, back to the access. That leads to the last point as far as letting people give you money, is that you have to listen to them and then actually give them levels to go. You always have to give your tribe places to go further with you, because they're always wanting to go further. When I came out with the Bite-Sized Entrepreneur about my experiences with Cuddler and So Quotable, it became a bestseller. I was not expecting that. And that got me on the road and really started my speaking career. And I started traveling the country, even started to go overseas. And I was doing 3 or 4 of these keynotes, and the same thing would happen. We'd have the keynote, we'd have the Q&A, and then someone afterwards, I'd be signing their book. And like, Damon, hey, I loved your keynote. I loved your Q&A. Thank you for answering my question when I asked it from the audience. I have more questions that are more kind of detailed. Did you want to grab a coffee or a drink or something? And I'd be like, well, I guess so. And they're like, well, no, not like that. Just, I want to go a little bit deeper. And I'm like, oh, okay. And what I would say those first few times is that I'd be like, well, drop me a line, drop me an email, and I have a column with Inc. magazine and so forth. I'll go and forward you to my columns. I'll probably address some of the stuff you're talking about. Excuse me. But thank you for coming through, and I'll let you know when the next book comes. I think that was literally what I was saying. Those that are much savvier than me probably understand what was going on. It took me a while. But again, after the 3rd or 4th keynote like that, it happened again. And thinking the same thing happened. And then they were like, well, no, like, Like, I want to ask like some deeper questions, not take you out for a drink, but some deeper questions. And like, do you coach or anything like that? And I was like, well, it depends on what you need. And they're like, oh, okay, so how much do you charge? And you never say you don't know. And I was like, well, how about this? How about, let me get your email. And then by the end of the day, I'll email you and we'll talk about some things. That's what I did. And sure enough, by the end of the day, I'm emailing them. And I think I charged $50 an hour. Kind of did some research online, talked to some people I know. I'm like, I don't know. So don't feel bad if you're not sure what to charge or how it works, because a lot of us are trying to figure things out. And I emailed them and they're like, great, sounds good. And we ended up meeting at a coffee shop. They bought me a coffee. We ended up talking about things based on the framework I talk about in the Bite-Sized Entrepreneur, but specific to them. They said, thank you very much. And they gave me a check for $50. And I was like, oh, okay. Now in 2020, my business coaching, and now at this point I've coached hundreds of people. My business coaching is now a major part of my business, financially, but also a part of how I serve. But I wasn't planning on that. Again, my background is writing. I planned on writing books and then just everything's in the book. You don't need to talk to me. And then the public speaking called me. And then it went on from there. The thing is that people were telling me, my community, my tribe was telling me all along where I was supposed to go, where they were going. We need this, Damon. And I wasn't hearing them because I was trying to serve them in a certain way. Right? It's like having a kid over here and someone's really asking for this other kit and you keep focusing on this. At a certain point, either you're going to get frustrated or they're going to leave. So you have to give them levels to go to and different levels to invest. Not just financially, but time-wise. A simple example would be with my stuff where at inkdamonbrown.com, you can read my ink column. It's free. I get paid for it, but it's free to you. So you can read it. I want something deeper. Cool. Why don't you come to my website and you can buy some of my books. They're like $20 or $30. Cool. I want something more. Cool. Well, why don't you go to my boot camp and then do the boot camp? It's a few $100s and it goes up from there. But I have some interactive videos and videos from other people as far as how to start your startup and as well as how to do your side hustle, etc. Or I want something deeper. Well, we can do some one-on-one coaching. Why I want something deeper. Or I can come keynote at your organization. You see what I mean? Like, it wasn't like side hustles began as just this, this stack of things. It's rather they started as something small. I'm going to write a book, and became I'm going to go keynote conferences. But that's based on the feedback and of that 90% serving versus 10% selling. If it was the other way around, I'd just be out here trying to hustle books, which doesn't make any sense because people and I can serve on so many different other ways. That's the beauty of letting people give you money, because if you let them give you money, then they will show you in the ways that you can serve them. And of course, you can go ahead and have the benefit of not only having the financial security, but also being able to serve your community and make it a better community at the level that they need to be. So those are the three. You end up having one, remembering that you should be a proud side hustler. You probably come from this lineage. If you don't come from this lineage, you have people around you who are side hustling. Lean on them. Understand that you understand some of this game already, and you're actually ahead of the curve based on probably the majority of America. So that's one. Number two is to remember your priority, your one big rock. Remember the rock analogy. If you feel lost, what's your big rock? If you're just starting your side hustle, establish your big rock now. If you're already into it, then remember what your big rock is. Sit down and write it down if you have to. But it won't take it that long because we all have one big rock. We don't have multiple rocks. We have one priority. Try to have that level of honesty with yourself. Lastly, and again, my personal favorite, remember your worth even when other people don't understand your vision. The time to wait for permission is done. And in fact, the people that can so-called empower you, they're not in a position to empower you, particularly during the pandemic and all that stuff going on. Nobody knows what they're doing. So you're just as qualified as everybody else, which is brilliant and strong and great. One of my favorite African proverbs is that history is always told from the perspective of the hunter, not from the lion. In other words, the people in power, the people that end up surviving, if that's right, the right term for it, they're always the ones that dictate what's hot and what's not. But that's a biased history. With you doing side hustles outside of the traditional system, you paving your own way, you have the opportunity to create your own story. You are writing your own story. And therefore, you're able to transform yourself, transform your community, and ideally, eventually, transform the world. Thank you.